Hi, David Bizard here. You guys are watching PowerTec 10. This is the channel where we strive very hard to get you useful facts and, more importantly, accurate facts to make your vehicle a more potent machine. If you have any complaints about that, or you find we've made a mistake, please let us know. Well, I'm sure you will let us know, but seriously, we don't like making mistakes, and we take that very seriously. But on with the subject matter at hand. In this episode, we are going to take a look at Eric Weingartner's Cam Challenge. Now, as many of you will know, I've already entered. In fact, I was the first to enter, contrary to some people said who I wouldn't dare enter in case it showed me up. Contrary, I'm going to enter so that it shows me up, but for a different reason to what you thought. Anyway, let's get on with Eric's cam test. First off, let me say, I think his format is a damn good idea. However, it would be nice if we could club together, and even those people who haven't entered, put some money in the kitty for the winner. If we do that, I'm sure we will attract people who are, how shall I say, likely, not for certain, but likely to be further up the ladder. So if we could make it a $2,000 pot instead of a $1,000 pot, I'm sure it would be much more worthwhile for a lot of people. Better yet, if we could make it $3,000. So, if you have any cash to put into it, go to Eric's Super Thanks and put it in there and say that this is for the kitty. Right, so got that bit over with. Now, let's look at what we might need to take care of in this competition. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make sure that you guys understand what the rules are. Now, the first thing I want to say here is that I've set myself some rules of my own, which I feel that I must adhere to. Difficult word, that. Adhere. Wonder what it means. Anyway, on with the plot. I know that some of you guys are going to use profiles that are absolutely vicious, i.e. they may make a few dyno pulls before they start destroying the valve train and themselves. I'm not there. The profiles I'm going to select will be ones that will live on the street. Ones that I would stand by and warranty myself. So even if I get, say, Cam Company B to grind them, if they fail, I will pay for the replacement of them. That's how sure I want to be that my cams are legitimate ones for you as a customer. Secondly, Eric's rules call for an RPM range from 4,000 to 7,000. Well, I know Eric's probably got a good reason for that RPM span, probably time. But I would like to go for 3,000 to 7,000. And if I had my way, just to show the cams over the full range, I would go from 2,000 to 7,000, because too many of these cams have too narrow a power band, and I'm into wide power bands. Give you an example of that. The engine that I did for Chrysler many years ago had a power band from 400 RPM to 8,000. This makes the use of variable cam timing a little redundant. We don't need it. I guess it's nice to have on an expensive vehicle, but if you can have a 400 to 8,000 RPM band, do you really need to have that variable cam timing? I think not. There was nothing complicated about the valve train. It was just a selection of the right cam for the rest of the engine. Right, on to the next thing. Now here I've got something which I pointed out to Eric, and I think he appreciated this, was that we could have a situation. Let me step back a point here. Eric is going to use a fixed timing. In other words, the timing doesn't change. It's going to be set at, let us say, for instance, 30 degrees was what the engine did the best on the cams that he tested. Now, the cams he's already run in the engine are legitimate for sale over the counter cams that will live. However, let's say somebody comes along, and it's not against the rules, and they do a cam which is really vicious. Now, that's okay. I'm not going there, but that's okay. Now, here's what could happen, or what will happen if they get the event timing right for it. Right? It's no good having a vicious profile and then having the wrong valve opening points for it and closing. So, if that's the case, the reason it will make more torque and horsepower is the VE is better, which means around the point of ignition, the cylinder pressure will be higher and the flame front will be faster. This could mean the guy with the best cam loses because the ignition is too far advanced for that cam. So I suggested to Eric, and I'd like the rest of you to kind of play in on this, that we find out what the optimum cam timing is with a typical good cam. Then we back it off by maybe 2 degrees. Now, of course, this is going to cause a drop in power for all the cams that have not quite the VE of the, in quotes, best cam. But hell, it's the same for all of us, right? So, Eric, I would like us to back that timing off, and I think you said the timing at the moment is 28 or 29 degrees. You know what that tells me? Combustion process is good. Normally, if you've got a small block Chevy and it's a decent combustion, and I'm not talking about a super one now, a decent one, 32 to 34 degrees is it. With mine, I've spent a lot of time on combustion analysis and ways and means to improve on it. I'm typically setting my timing for optimum power around 28, 29 degrees. Right? More advanced is not more power. In fact, the better the combustion is, the less advanced the engine needs, which is good. And the less likely it is to detonate. And the more likely it is to get good gas mileage. Now, I'm talking about maximum timing here, all out timing, and toward the top of the RPM. Now, what else can I talk about here? Well, first off, if you're going to enter this competition, you're going to need to have a guide as to what the base engine is. Go to Eric's site. I'll put the link in the description below, and look up the figures. Now, there is one section in the video that I'm recommending there where he goes through the details on the cylinder head, and I thought it'd be nice if I ran Eric's figures through my IOP program to see just how well he's doing. Well, was a slight snag here because he only did the figures more or less at 100 thousandths divisions until it got to quite high lift. Here's something of interest. A cylinder head that we checked the other day that Eric had done showed flow figures within about 2 CFM of each other. We showed 2 CFM more than his, but we're talking about something over 300 CFM now, so minor detail. Now, what else do I need to... yes, Now, it takes a while to look through all those figures and make any sense. So, like I said, what I did was put those numbers into my IOP program. In fact, I remodeled his head, the head that he's going to use, which is a, I'll put that in a caption below, down here, because I can't pull it off the top of my head here. Anyway, here's the figures for it. And I'll tell you now, with the limited mods that Eric has done on this cylinder head, it flows very well, very good flow results. So let's just take a look at those, and we'll see if Eric's, how shall I say, the reputation he'd like to have as a great head porter holds any water. Let me tell you now, it sure does. I've said the guy's good. Now here's the stuff put in on my program, all the way down to things like mean port velocity, port energy, etc., etc. You get a load of this. Well, here we are. Now here is a test of the validity of whether Eric is really good at doing heads or not. Let's see. Let's open our IOP program. Well, here we are, opening page. This is the program that Stan Weiss and I wrote some time ago now. Hit the enter button and it brings us to this page here. This is where we start entering the engine spec. Some of it only provisionally for now, but we'll go through that. First, the compression ratio. In our case, that's going to be 11.4. That's for the 408 that Eric is putting on the dyno for the test. Next, we go over and we put in such things as bore, stroke, and it's already got 8 cylinders entered. We also put in provisionally the mean port area. I'm guessing that's about 2.8 square inches. And lastly, our flow at maximum lift. I know what that is from the numbers, and I'm putting in 340 provisionally. Then we hit calculate, and then we move on to the next page by hitting the exit from this page. And that brings us to this page where we enter the data that I'm going to arrow here. Now that's very important, because without this data you will not get the full benefit of this program. So here we go. The first entries are pretty obvious. You'll need all this data, but we get to a point where there's some stuff that most programs don't take into account. That is the dimensions of the port at whatever strategic point you think you want them. In this, we see we have the intake top corner, intake bottom corner, etc., width, and the program automatically calculates the area. Also, and this is something it does, is calculate how close you are to the theoretical optimum area of the port to area of the valve. Pretty slick stuff. It also calculates from the data I've just indicated here exactly what your intake to exhaust flow ratio should be. That 75% that people keep quoting is only right at about 11:1 compression. Before that and after that, it's not right. Just be aware of that. Over here, we have in red the columns where you enter the flow. Now we're doing this at 28 inches, so we put in the relevant box that we want it corrected to 28 inches, whatever it may be. In the 2 yellow columns on the left, we have the corrected flow for the intake and exhaust. As I've said, we corrected our figures to the normally used 28 inches. 2 columns on the right effective lift are the amount of lift that you can see before the actual valve size becomes the limiting factor. For SAE figures, we don't use the hole underneath the valve, we use the valve diameter. This is used for the calculations of the discharge coefficient. I won't go into the details why that is done. Maybe when I get onto a cylinder head and flow bench only deal, I'll do that. But for now, understand that when discharge coefficients are calculated, they are calculated for that number shown in the column that changes to a usually odd number. And this always occurs at 0.25 times the valve diameter. Scanning down these corrected numbers, we can see before we take another step that the flow figures were pretty good. But it's going to have to take some graphs to see where we've gone and where it's possible to go with these heads. So here's the first graph. The black dotted line here is the valve lift we have to work with. As you can see, it crosses our flow curves at some pretty good flow figures. Intake 364 CFM, exhaust 246. That is way more than you get from a typical 23-degree Chevy head by a bunch. And remember, this is only one of Eric's basic porting jobs. But to see what's really going on, we need to look at the discharge coefficient of these two valves. And here they are. Notice the area that I've ringed in green. This is the low lift discharge coefficient. Now I have seen better figures than this, but these figures are well above average, in as much as they do fall into the very effective range. Let's deal with the exhaust first. As we follow it across the graph, we see that it comes down and curves at the inflection point, which takes place at 0.25D. Again, a fairly typical characteristic there, but when it reaches the 2.5D mark, it takes off. The port gets more and more efficient and reaches a very effective 88% efficient. Now that's way above what normal ports go. Typical numbers around 75%. So we can see that Eric's port there has done very well. Now, a line like that indicates that the port itself, when unencumbered by the presence of the valve head, which starts to happen at the inflection point, it really takes off, meaning that the port shape is very well done. As for the intake, that reaches its inflection point again at the 0.25D mark, which is the blue line. Once it passes this point, it does start to climb. However, as it gets to about 700 lift, it levels out. So that indicates that the port is not as efficient as it could be when compared with other ports of similar design. However, that occurs outside of the lift range, so it's not necessarily something to worry about. Of course, we have to wonder whether any of this high flow lift capability has been brought about by a port which may just be too big. So the next thing we need to analyze is, what does mean port speed get to at maximum lift? So let's look at that now. Just so that you know, the optimum number at peak valve lift for port velocity, as dictated by this program, is between 300 and 320. As we see at peak valve lift, both ports are running around about 314 feet per second. Just right for a good torquey output from a street motor. Well, everything's looking pretty good so far, but we've got one more parameter to check. And this is a very telling one because it gives us a clue as to how good the head is compared with anything else out there. That is the port energy density per foot length of port. So here it is. Most heads that I've run across the flow bench, and that's a considerable number, tend to fall into the 22 to 24 foot-pounds per square inch per foot length. That's in the green circle. As you can see, Eric's head was 26.4 foot-pounds per square inch per foot at peak valve lift. So that puts it into probably about the top 5% of cylinder heads for 2-valve pushrod motors. Very good. Okay, time to make a summary here. Is Eric any good at porting heads? If this is a typical example of his work, he's well above average. Now, is he the only good guy on my list of head porters? No. I've made mention from time to time of one or two others, but one that I really want to turn my attention to because I don't believe I've mentioned him in the last 2 years of doing these videos, and that is Spears Racing Heads. Now, I've used some heads or dynoed some heads a couple of times and they worked out well. He's also had his cylinder heads on engines for the Engine Masters Challenge, and I believe the engines concerned did well, won a Pontiac engine, winning the category that it was in. Anyway, that's all I've got to say on Eric's heads for the moment. Those of you who are going to enter the cam shootout now have some graphs of the cylinder head's properties. You should have everything here that you need to produce a good cam. Don't forget to like, subscribe, super thanks, share, and all that other good stuff. And thanks for watching.